You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Everybody, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Friday. Brian Kamenetzky and Andy Kamenetzky want to let you know today's episode brought to you by Michelob Ultra. Enjoyment isn't the end game, it's the whole game at only 2.6 carbs and 95 calories. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. A lot we want to get to today. Got the mailbag open at KamenetzkyBrothers@gmail.com. If you want to send us an email at CamBrothers on Twitter, if you want to do it that way, Andy. But the big news is out of Dallas.
Isn't it always these days?
It is. It does seem to be. So the Mavericks, who let go of Donnie Nelson and mutually parted ways with Rick Carlisle.
They had a conscious uncoupling.
Yes, it did.
As Gwynnie and Chris Martin from Coldplay had.
It's no sign whether or not either one of them have started in on that goop diet, but we'll find out.
Neither looks like steaming their private parts.
It looks like the Mavericks
that we know of, that we're not reporting it one way or the other.
I mean, and no judgments. This is a judgment-free zone.
No, I'm judging. I'm totally judging.
Okay,
the steaming, I'm judging. It's true.
I am not going to say I don't have thoughts. I'm just saying that I don't know. I've never done it.
For a multitude of reasons.
Well, right. But I'm just saying, it's like, I can't say for sure that it's a good idea or a bad idea.
I consider myself, Brian, largely a very non-judgmental person. This particular case, judging. Oh, well.
You got to draw the line somewhere.
Everybody's got a breaking point.
Hot talk.
I see what you did there.
I know. It's pretty clever. All right. But the first bit of news there, which is interesting on a couple levels, the Mavericks seem to be close to hiring Nico Harrison, who's a Nike executive, to fill their president of basketball operations gig, which to me is, well respected around the league. Obviously, if you're that high up at Nike, you've got a lot of good relationships, reportedly one with Luka Doncic. He's been recruited by teams before. It's kind of this trend, though, I think, Andy, that's an extension of what the Lakers did with Rob Pelinka, bringing in an agent to be their GM, president of basketball ops, whatever his title is, Leon Rose in New York. Like the places, because of the evolution of the job, really, I think the places teams are looking to find talent to run a front office is just very different than it was, 10, 15 years ago. The idea that Rob Pelinka would have been hired to be the GM of a team like the Lakers 20 years ago is no, it absolutely would not have happened. So, Nico Harrison seems like he's an evolution of that.
It's funny, Brian, that you say that. When this happened, that the news broke about Harrison, the first thing that popped into my head was you can draw a direct line from Sonny Vaccaro to Nico Harrison. Like in terms of just the evolution of influence with sneaker culture, just on basketball itself, but then like the relationship,
steaming genitals, like all of it all ties together.
No, that one actually I didn't.
No, okay.
but that I thought that was interesting though, because it wasn't necessarily that long ago that somebody like Sonny Vaccaro was considered this complete outsider. And this rebel force that, a lot of people had issues with. Like it felt to me like there is that line, it's a long straight line, but it's a line from Vaccaro to Nico Hamilton.
Harrison. You're distracted by the genitals. I get it. The other half of the news, which is really more relevant, I think, even to Lakers fans, is that Jason Kidd is considered, I don't want to say it's a done deal, but everybody seems to be thinking that it's going to happen, that Jason Kidd, who we've talked about for the last week and a half or so, as a guy who does not seem long for Frank Vogel's staff, is going to be the head coach in Dallas. Before we get to what this does to Frank Vogel's staff and how the Lakers might go about replacing him, One thing that I think is crazy about this is, for all the, it's, I guess, the third homecoming for Jason Kidd in Dallas. I admit, Andy, we have a specific circle we run in. I'm not like deep into Mavs Twitter, but like where we do have access to people who opine over these sorts of things, there does not seem to be a lot of excitement at the idea of Jason Kidd becoming the next head coach of the Mavericks.
Well, I mean, if you're looking at this from the perspective of the X's and O's, or if you're looking at this from the perspective of character and what somebody seems to be like away from the game, there are issues or questions, concerns with Kidd. I mean, it really speaks to the power of having built up respect from players around the league.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you look at the Mavericks organization, you've got Dirk Nowitzki brought back as part of the organization. Michael Finley's part of the organization, and Damian Lillard had openly lobbied for Kidd to become the head coach of Portland.
Like, it actually makes you wonder, like, if he had not done that publicly, I wonder if Kidd might have found that job more appealing. It is a difficult spot where, like, the star of the team is lobbying, says, I want you, because no coach wants to feel like they were picked by the player. Puts him in an odd spot, but yeah, you're right. I mean, that happened.
And the Lakers clearly saw LeBron and Jason Kidd's relationship as critical when they were looking to basically hire Frank Vogel's staff for him, and they very clearly saw Jason Kidd as, if nothing else, like a safety blanket, security blanket in case things went south with Vogel. But like, there's those character concerns like we talked about, the past domestic violence issues, the DUI, which is especially notable considering the expose that came out a few years ago with the Mavericks about them being this culture of toxicity.
They've had all kinds of stuff.
Right. And these are issues, by the way, that included misogyny, sexual harassment, and domestic violence with people involved with the organization. Kidd, as you said, left the organization twice, both times on bad terms. But it's hard to believe that Luka Doncic is not, at minimum, okay with this.
Sure.
And he definitely has buy-in around the league, Kidd. And
and you mentioned
that stuff matters.
He got it from LeBron. He got it. Like, those guys were deeply, deeply. And look, Frank Vogel gave Kidd a glowing review when they talked about, when he was asked about Kidd at his exit interview. Vogel was incredibly complimentary of Kidd's work, his work ethic, his relationships with players, the way he worked with the rest of the staff. We talked about this on a show, I think it was last week. Like, I don't have a great answer other than I would be uncomfortable hiring him for my team, because I don't know exactly, but I don't know where the line is for something like this, for somebody who, again, like, and players compartmentalize in the same way that fans do and whatever. I'm not sure they're that concerned about Jason Kidd's background.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've seen a lot of what seems like Dallas fan reaction on Twitter to people who cover the team when they've been tweeting the updates with Kidd and stuff like that. And it seems like they're not particularly excited about it, if for no other reason than Kidd does not have a particually good reputation.
I think that's.
Well, as an X's and O's guy, like
that's exactly right.
Haley O'Shaughnessy, she's one of the co-hosts of the Spincers podcast, really good basketball podcast that people should check out. And I thought she summed this up really well in expressing her misgivings with Kidd getting this job. And I'm paraphrasing a bit, but she said, we've all come to accept the idea that if you're somebody with talent will typically offset character concerns when it comes to being able to get a job. Like, and that's not necessarily the way things should work, but it's the way things do work. Jason Kidd has not shown the talent as a head coach that makes all of these other things seem worth offsetting.
Yeah.
And that's where it stands with him.
As much as people mock Mike Budenholzer and, his the constant griping about his adjustments to the playoffs, Milwaukee got a lot better with, I think, if I remember correctly, borderline basically the same team when he replaced Kidd. So I do think that most of the trepidation among Dallas people about Kidd probably has as much to do with that, if from a fan standpoint, as it is his background. Let's get next though. Let's turn back to the Lakers and what this does for Vogel's staff and how the Lakers might go about replacing Jason Kidd, because as you mentioned, Andy, he filled a very large role on that roster and had LeBron's ear, had a lot of respect among the guys who matter on the Lakers roster. We'll do that next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar ever. Bars covered in 100% chocolate. They're soft. They're easy to chew, not like the ones. They know who they are. They're a bunch of deadbeat protein bars. They taste awful, man. Like just, ugh. But Built Bars, they're healthy. They're great for the health conscious guy. If you're trying to lose or maintain weight, but you still want something that tastes great, little treat for yourself, low calorie, low sugar, high protein, high fiber, great for keto diets. They've got awesome flavors like the originals, including coconut almonds, salted caramel, banana bread, new flavors like cherry barcia, lemon almond cheesecake, cookies and cream. They are awesome for somebody like me who just loves really interesting, cool, unique flavor combinations. You're never going to get bored eating the same thing over and over, particularly something that is hard to chew and tastes awful to eat with Built Bar. So go to BuiltBar.com, use the promo code LOCK15. You get 15% off your first order. Promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com.
So the Lakers have a situation now where they can replace Jason Kidd on their staff. Now, look, they've still got Lionel. There's no shortage of guys with some juice on that roster, players who can step in and be a head coach for a game or two or whatever it might be. But they have an opportunity to replace Jason Kidd. And the context, to me, Andy, is what is so interesting about the choice that they're going to have to make. Because when Kidd was hired, like you said before in the first segment, it was essentially as Vogel insurance. He was there as the guy they could bring in just in case things didn't go well.
Or the guy who would just take Vogel's job.
Right. Exactly.
And the Lakers would look the other way as it was happening.
It didn't work. We didn't know where to turn, Andy. And so we turned to the guy that we hired just in case we had to fire the guy that we hired.
We turned to the guy that we hired to replace the guy that we hired.
Right.
How this happened, we don't know exactly. But
I was steaming my genitals, and all of a sudden I needed to hire a coach, and I just picked the first guy because look, man, I was on the hot seat.
Life is full of twisting, turning mysteries. That can be, it's not worth sometimes trying to get into the weeds of how stuff happened. You just have to accept the
As
things
Homer
that are
Simpson once said to Bart, we could sit here and argue all day about who forgot to pick up who.
Exactly.
But the context though now is very different because Frank Vogel is not going anywhere. The Lakers presumably will find a contract extension for him this offseason. He is established. He's going to be the head coach, presumably for the next few years. They don't need a guy anymore to be a head coach in waiting. So that changes the deal. On the other hand, the role that Kidd played as a respected guy who played, respected veteran, dude who's been on the sidelines and all that kind of stuff also has value. And either this is before you get to, do you want an offensive guy, a defensive guy, a veteran, like all that stuff. They have some choices that they could make in what could be an appealing job, assuming they're willing to pay for it. Where would you look on that spectrum for Jason Kidd's replacement on Vogel's staff?
It's funny. I actually would look more towards the offense, or when you had said before, like before you even get into that, I would feel like at this point, if Frank Vogel doesn't have that buy-in, from LeBron, from AD, the two guys who really matter, without Jason Kidd being there, then ultimately he doesn't have the buy-in. Like if Jason Kidd was in some way reassurance to those two guys with what Vogel wanted to do, then Vogel still has a lot of things that he needs to work out, regardless of who you bring in there. So assuming that is not an issue, I would look for somebody that really is good at loosening up an offense, finding different ways to make it more creative, somebody who might be able to solve this riddle of what do you do in those 10 minutes a game where LeBron doesn't play, the 15 minutes a game where he is not on the floor.
Well, but even next year, I mean, when we had Jeff Stotts on Thursday's show, broke it down. Like he expects LeBron to be healthy next year, that he'll be fine.
Sure.
But the last 2 seasons do indicate Father Time starting to catch up a little bit. If LeBron gets hurt, at the very least, he seems to stay hurt longer.
I mean, look, man, I don't care. I don't care.
A guy who could a guy. I mean, the only reason I say this is because there is the presumption that when you have LeBron, like that's the system. Your system is LeBron, and that's true. But there may be a even greater need to try to find ways to lighten that. And so, an offensive-minded coach, a very creative offensive coach could help with that. Not even just the moments that LeBron's not on, the whole deal.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't care how optimistic Jeff Stotts is about LeBron's return next season. He ain't going to play 48 minutes. I mean, he's definitely going to be off the court at some point. I think they need to find at times more creative ways to use AD, the way he's implemented on the floor. Like,
yep.
I think these are things that it's become clear with Vogel's time with the Lakers, but also if you look at even the really successful teams he had in Indiana, they were never great offensive teams. They were always defense first, often elite defense teams, and that's great. But man, that also puts a lot of pressure on a team. Like that becomes really difficult over the course of an entire 82 games plus the playoffs.
Yeah, you know who would agree with you significantly? Sixers fans.
Yeah.
I mean, because that essentially is the problem with Ben Simmons. It's not that, can you win with Ben Simmons? Yeah, sure. He's a really good player. You have to put him around the rim. And when you are that bad offensively, you have to be you have to be lights out in every way on defense. And that is a difficult thing to sustain. It's not that defense don't win championships, whatever, but you can't make it so you cannot make a mistake defensively and expect to win. And that's essentially where the Lakers kind of were last year, is they were just so bad offensively that they leaned on their defense in impractical ways, even for a defensive-minded coach with a defensive ethic, with the belief that defense wins championships. It's not sustainable.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to a Lakers Film Room podcast with our friends Pete and Darius and Mike, and they brought up a theory that I hadn't thought about before, but I definitely think could have some validity, that some of the outside shooting woes the Lakers have, beyond just they've never really had a lot of just knockdown, established season after season snipers on the team. The type of defense that they play can actually just deaden your legs. Like, it is so damn hard to play that level of intense defense
you're right.
over the course of an entire season. There's going to be a toll paid, and the toll may just be coming in guys' legs. And that is at least a reason, perhaps, that the outside shooting for this team has not been good or consistent the last couple of years.
So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, names like, Terry Stotts is a name that people throw out there because he's, runs a very, run good offenses in the past and this and that. He's available because Portland let him go. And I don't know if he's going to land somewhere else in this offseason or not. But I will say, like, the luxury that the Lakers have is they don't have to go get Terry Stotts. They, because he's kind of a made guy, or a well-established coach who can be the next guy. They can go get a really good offensive mind, somebody who's a career assistant. And as long as, it needs to be somebody who's well respected, who has LeBron's respect, who has AD's respect, and all that. But it does not have to be a guy that the average basketball fan knows really well. And that does open up options for them. And it should be a pretty appealing job around the league, I would think.
Well, and Brian, this was a team that before everybody got hurt, they looked like they could make another run to the finals and maybe defend their title. It's a reminder, too. Stay on the road to the finals.
Nice.
Our NBA playoffs coverage brought to you by Michelob Ultra. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. I enjoy these segs. And at 2.6 carbs, 95 calories, we can all enjoy the games a little more this season.
Let's open up the mailbag, Andy, because people send us mail at KamenetzkyBrothers@gmail.com. You can also send us tweets at CamBrothers if you are unwilling to learn how to spell Kamenetzky. So we'll do that next. Got a really interesting question about Montrezl Harrell as we kind of dive into our, I don't know what you want. It's not report cards, but player deep dives. We'll look at Trez next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline, the fastest, easiest way to bet on all your sports action. Baseball season's in full swing. You can track all the action at BetOnline. This week, tons of sports action on the go. Get all the latest news, odds, info for all your sporting needs, including MLB, NBA, NHL, UFC, MMA. Before the next pitch, head over to BetOnline on your laptop, your mobile device. Check out all the great sporting news, sign-up bonuses, contest information. Don't sit on the sidelines anymore. This is your chance to get into the game as teams are neck deep in the playoffs. Head to the website, use your mobile device, sign up today, receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit using the promo code LOCKEDON. Bet Online, your online sportsbook experts.
So let's open up the mailbag here. This from the Gmail account, KamenetzkyBrothers@gmail.com, from Norman Ian Karnick. Thanks for sending in the note. Reminder, send us stuff. Leave us comments on the iTunes page too as well. We check that. Locked On Lakers at iTunes to try to get some questions we can use on the show. Always want your reviews and your questions there.
Well, we want your 5-star reviews. You can leave us a 5-star review and then say we're awful. We don't care. But it's very important that you leave the 5-star. We will read your crappy comment. Just ripping.
I tweeted out the guy who said that we are causing him physical pain.
Yeah, except
he
that
hates
guy,
us so much. And I right. My point is, I tweeted that out anyway, and it was like a 2-star review. I mean, we were causing him physical pain just by talking. He hates us so much.
I think you made a big mistake with that, Brian, because his rating was too low. I don't care what he said. Again, give us a 5-star review. You can say the worst things about us possible. I don't care. Algorithms. It's all about the algorithms.
A queers from Norman Ian Karnick. I'm a bit perplexed as to why he, meaning Montrezl Harrell, doesn't seem to play defense well. I would have thought he could defend 4s or big 3s on the outside. Oddly, Drummond, when he doesn't park himself in purgatory, is more mobile than I expected. And while nobody wants Drummond switching to guards, it's far less totally abysmal than I would have expected. In Trez's case, however, I pictured him developing much more under Vogel than he did defensively. Possibly practices would have made a huge difference, but it also feels like he exceeds his abilities in the paint, but is a huge disappointment in covering folks more his size on the outside. Montrezl Harrell as a defender is a fascinating question because it's kind of an extension of Montrezl Harrell, the player. I mean, he is a guy. I looked at it this year, Andy. His numbers were just as good, really, as they were on a per 36-minute basis with the Clippers. His defensive numbers were a little bit better in some ways. His rebounding numbers were a little bit better in some ways. But in the end, the Lakers still felt like he was unplayable defensively in the playoffs. So let's start with that. Let's start with the defense. Why isn't he a better defender than he is? He obviously works hard. He cares.
I think when it comes to him as a center, he's just too undersized to really be effective as a defensive center. I mean, even as a backup center, he's usually surrendering size, and he's not somebody like, remember Chuck Hayes, who was just so damn strong.
He was a tree stump. You could go over him, but you can't move him.
Right, exactly. And he at least had that going for him in trying to defend guys bigger than him. Montrezl Harrell doesn't have that. I mean, he's not strong like that. He isn't a long enough guy defensively. He is always going to be surrendering a lot when he's defending in the paint, and it doesn't really matter the effort because, like you said, I think he puts it in. He just doesn't have the physical capabilities to do it. And then in terms of being switched out or having some assignment along the perimeter, I don't think his instincts are great. To be fair, he did not do it a ton over the course of this year. I mean, he was used basically exclusively as a backup 5. He did not play often with somebody who would be defensively the 5 in those type of lineups. Things will happen over the course of a game, but that's not what he did primarily, even a little bit. But the times when he did do it, I don't think he has great defensive instincts for when he's supposed to be rotating over, some of the things that he's supposed to be doing. it just didn't look like it was there.
Yeah, and it should be noted. I mean, I agree with you basically. But he's he'll take charges, a lot of charges.
Absolutely.
It's not a lack of interest or effort, but like defense at the NBA level is really, really hard. And for whatever reason, between the maybe some instincts that aren't perfect, and then the size question, when it gets into a playoff and players' weaknesses can be exploited in the ways that they can in the playoffs, it gets hard to play him. But that larger question though too of like, did Montrezl Harrell have a good season? I think he did. I mean, certainly if you just look straight by straight numbers, on a per 100 basis, his offensive rating was the second best that he's had in his career. His defensive rating was the best that he's had in his career. His rebound rate was up. Some of the offensive numbers were a little bit down, which you would expect on a team with LeBron and AD. If you go back, Andy, to that March run that he had, 13 games, 19 and a half points a game, 8 rebounds, playing almost 30 minutes a night. I actually think that explains his bad April to some degree, being leaned on that much. February and March, he was really good. It's hard for me to find a ton of fault in what Trez did, and I'm still not entirely sure I think the Lakers can bring him back.
Well,
unless he chooses to.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. Trez, in his exit interview, because he's got a player option for next season, he sounded like a guy that doesn't want to come back, but may already realize he has to come back because he's not going to be able to get on the open market what he suspected he'd be able to get when he signed his original contract.
But I'm just saying, setting that stuff aside, it's like he didn't do anything wrong, but I don't know if it worked. And I thought it was going to be a good idea, and in some ways it did. I mean, in some ways there were a lot of nights where, as a regular season player, and the regular season people matters. It matters how you support LeBron and AD, and with whom, and how many minutes and how many points you can give those guys so they don't have to do as much. Where he performed exactly as the Lakers would want him. So are you excited at the prospect of Trez? It was something we'll talk about a lot over the summer, but do you want him to re-up that last year? Or would you prefer he not? I'm genuinely torn on this one, so at least right now.
I mean, if I had some type of assurances that LeBron and AD would be able to stay healthy next season in a way that I thought, raised Montrezl Harrell's utility in the first place, then yes. Mm-hmm. Because for the first few months of the season, like you said, he did exactly what I thought he was not only expected to do, but also needed to do. Ultimately those two guys ended up getting hurt. But LeBron.
Right. And by the way, if it happens again, it doesn't matter what Harrell does.
Right, and LeBron's injury was just bad luck. Solomon Hill running into him in a way that's a basketball thing. And AD, I will be the first to admit, I underestimated the effect of a shortened offseason combined with the longest playoff run of his entire career. The effects of that heading into this season, I completely underestimated what that would do to him as a player. But in terms of what you would need from a guy in the regular season to help keep everybody fresh, Montrezl Harrell was the equivalent of an innings eater in baseball. And by and large, I thought he did the job well. It depends a lot on who else gets brought back.
Right. And can you is there another option for somebody out there? And look, ultimately, he didn't even hurt they had the best defense in the league in the regular season. So you could play him. You could have a strong defense. You could get them. I mean, I would love is there somebody conceptually who fills that bill better than him? I don't know. We have to start breaking down, what trades you can make and all that. And we got time to do that over the summer. This was evaluating everything on the Lakers this year in terms of what worked and what didn't is very hard. It's a Pelinka problem, big Pelinka problem, because you don't exactly know what to fix with precision because the stars got hurt. I made the comparison to a car. It's like, you might have transmission trouble, but you can't tell any of it because your car doesn't have an engine. It's like that, he is part of that big mystery, and evaluating whether or not it worked is tricky, because I think we expected him not to have a big role in the playoffs, and we were cool with that.
All you can say is that during the period where everybody was basically present and accounted for, Trez worked. I would say
and
that
the team worked.
Right. I would say that his return is not necessarily a pressing matter one way or the other beyond the finances. Like, if he comes back, I think he can be useful again. If he doesn't come back, I think that there are bigger problems this team will have either way. But again, it's always the biggest issue that might come from Trez staying might be the idea that he's coming back
because he has to, not because he wants to.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
With a negative feeling about it.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So we'll see if he wants to be back. He does not strike me as the kind of guy you want on your roster if he doesn't want to be there.
No.
All right. So
he also doesn't strike me as somebody who's going to be very good at faking it either.
No.
He's
not an actor, that Montrezl Harrell.
No, he is something of an emotional
He's an open book.
Yes.
An open book. Reminder to people, subscribe to the Locked On Lakers YouTube channels. Have a bunch of stuff go up there this week. It's been a lot of fun. We'll do clips of the show, pull out individual little items that we think are good, separate stuff that's found only on the YouTube channel that we'll get up. Also a reminder too, Locker Room on Fridays.
Spotify Green Room.
Spotify Green Room Fridays at noon Pacific. So hopefully before you hear this on Friday, you can remind yourself to join us on Spotify. And I think that's it. We'll see everybody Monday.